My name is Mustafa Rashwani, and I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened.
My name is Sarah Malik, and I was in high school.
Terror strikes America. Tonight, a special ABC News and Current Affairs presentation.
I remember waking up and seeing my mum watch the morning news. She had her hands over her mouth.
A commercial passenger jet slams into one of New York's signature World Trade Center towers.
It had happened overnight in Australia, and I had gone on the school bus in the morning, and straight away I noticed that the tenor was different.
I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
Watching TV and watching the planes hitting the buildings, I mean, not fully comprehending what was going on, but at least having an inkling.
The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible.
A girl in my legal studies class actually saying, don't do anything crazy out there to any Muslims you might know.
My mum actually said, the world is very different now. You know, we have to be very careful.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Since that moment, she was absolutely correct. Life has never been the same, you know?
It was a scary time for a lot of people. Friends being spat out on the street, or people saying Islamophobic things at work, or feeling like you have to defend yourself, or something happening in the world and feeling like, oh, I have to go to work today and I have to deal with that because I have to deal with that.
It was possibly one of the biggest, the most important events in my childhood. But as I grew up and then as I went to university and I took up jobs, I was confronted with what felt like a country that rejected me.
What do we want? No more! When do we want it?
Do I tell people I'm Muslim? When do I tell them? Is it going to affect my job chances?
You can either be a Muslim or an Australian. It must be either or.
It's like a boxer, if you're in a boxing ring, they're on their last legs. Now imagine a community feeling like that for a long time. It felt like we as a community were just being belted.
Christchurch was really related to a whole spectrum of racialised violence that Muslim communities have been dealing with for the past 20 years or more.
You see yourself in the victims. We all go to the mosque every Friday to attend Friday prayer. Only now are we kind of as a country beginning to confront what happened in the ripple effects of 9/11. Perhaps we can sit here and reflect on it as though it's done, but the reality is this is only a minuscule part of the beginning.
Well, those ripple effects of September 11 are explored by academic and writer Randa Abdel-Fattah in her new book, Coming of Age in the War of Terror. And she joins us now on the panel. Randa, good evening to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us, what was your experience as a 22-year-old Australian Muslim in those days directly after the September 11 attacks, and how has it shaped your experience as a Muslim and those around you?
Well, I had already understood that my identity had been problematic for wider Australia because I was Australian, Palestinian, Muslim, Egyptian, and had come of age actually in the first Gulf War at a time when being Arab or Muslim was an accusation more than a description of my identity. So I understood that there were, that I was part of a problem community in terms of white Australia already. But after 9/11, that Islamophobia and the racism intensified and escalated. And as we heard just now, we saw how an entire community was suddenly turned into and constructed as a suspect community, as the enemy. In terms of me personally, I attended my part-time job at a law firm the next morning, and as I walked down the corridor, the colleagues that I had been working with for several years sort of walked to me and basically said, why did they do it? As though I somehow, because of my Muslimness, was able to understand the mindset of the perpetrators, and it was an immediate linking of me with a terrorist attack.
You mentioned there that your identity was more of an accusation than a description there. What is it like today?
I think that it's really important to understand, and this is what came out with my research and also my lived experiences, that when we're talking about what it feels like to grow up in the age of the war on terror, that there is an entire generation who has only ever known that world, that it is a world at war on terror, whereas I can sort of compartmentalise my life pre and post 9/11. But what I've learnt is that things are worse now in terms of Islamophobia and racism. But when I say that, I don't mean that 9/11 9/11 was the starting point. And the thing that I hope most people will get, if it's one thing out of my book, the thing that I want people to understand is that Islamophobia did not start on 9/11, that it is so important to understand that Islamophobia and race goes right back to the disposition and the genocide of Indigenous Australians in this country. The racial logics that set up this settler colony is what feeds and informs and animates the Islamophobia and racist logics that we see play out since 9/11. And that's really important to understand that connection.
A common theme in your book is about many Muslims needing to feel more white to fit in post-September 11, but as we're just hearing from you, you know, it obviously goes a long way back. But post-September 11, what are some of the examples of that, particularly for those people who weren't even born when September 11 happened?
Yeah, so I found in the book that, of course, the figure of the terrorist gets mapped onto different bodies. It gets mapped onto different suburbs. And, you know, I interviewed Muslim and non-Muslim students. I really wanted to understand comparatively what it would feel like growing up. And so a lot of the non-Muslim students almost universally said to me that when they think of a terrorist, the first image that pops into their head is a Muslim. And usually that Muslim is bearded, dark-skinned, from western suburbs of Sydney, because my fieldwork was in Sydney. When I spoke to Muslim students across Sydney, very often they understood what intersectionality meant. If you were a girl wearing a hijab, you were very often on the front line. If you had lighter skin compared to a black or brown or darker skinned Muslim, you had a bit more anonymity. You could slip through, and you could even sometimes pass as white. So you were afforded a bit more protection. There were some students I met who anglicised their names to fit in, who, you know, played on the fact that sometimes they were assumed to be of Anglo background because it gave them some protection in the playground. And so these were sort of the dynamics that play across the very varied and diverse communities that I spoke to.